All right, let me open this up with a very quick word and we'll get into the word. Father, we thank you, we praise you, and pray, Lord, that you would speak to us, proclaim your truth, and be glorified. We thank you, we praise your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, guys, we're finishing the book of Ruth. It's been a 1-month process. We're on chapter 4, which is the final chapter. And yeah, this is it. And actually, just to give you a heads up, we're going to go into the book of Hebrews next. I was debating between Hebrews or the Gospel of Mark, and Hebrews 1, and I'll give you the reason why. The reason why is no one knows who wrote Hebrews. No one knows. Right? There's a lot of different theories. Most people think Barnabas might have written Hebrews. A long time ago, people thought it was Paul, but it's very clearly not Paul because Paul always starts off with, I, Paul. And it's not Paul. And there's actually more of a current thought that it might have been Priscilla who wrote the book of Hebrews. And so I figured, you know what, we've been doing girl power, we did Esther, we did Ruth, let's stay with girl power in the New Testament and do the book of Hebrews. But I'll talk more about that later next week. So, we're finishing up, and this is the grand finale, right? We've been building up to this last chapter, and we know something good is about to happen, and so this is all about redemption, right? So before we get into this, what are some stories of redemption that have kind of stuck with you over the ages? Well, what are some stories of redemption that yeah, anything? Now, if you really think about it, almost any good book, story, or movie has some element of redemption, right? Either that or sacrifice or both. That's basically every good story. If it doesn't have either of those things, it's a sad story. Right? Anything? Anybody like sports movies? I think every single sports movie is about redemption. Because seriously, if they don't win at the end, why did you watch that movie? Korea, they just released 국가대표 2. So that's about a women's Olympic hockey, ice hockey team or something like that. Ridiculous. I don't know what are Korean girls doing? You could be Kim Yeona, but they're playing hockey. The 국가대표 1 was actually about the Korean ski jump. So I think that's kind of the theme of the movie, where it's kind of ridiculous events that Koreans don't normally do. Another previous movie that other people might have thought was Cool Runnings. The Jamaican bobsled team, silly stories about people that have tried things and are able to achieve them. I think every single sports movie is about redemption, right? Anyway, I don't want to belabor this point, but you guys get the picture. Good stories usually end with some type of form of redemption. That's exactly what's going to happen here in the book of Ruth. So, turn with me to Ruth chapter 4, starting with verse 1. Open up your Bibles, smartphones, or look at the screen. Ruth 4, starting with verse 1. Where the Lord says this. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was a method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel." Next, please. "He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. Amen. So we're getting near the final part of this year, and we've been on this theme of transformers, understanding how the gospel has transformed us, and understanding how God desires us to be agents of change wherever we are. And the reason why we've been focusing on characters like Esther and Ruth is to see how God brought transformation through the actions of individuals. Next slide, please. And when you look at Ruth, when you look at the first couple chapters, chapter 1, the stage is set where everything has gone wrong for this woman, Naomi. She lost her husband, she lost her 2 sons, and all she has left is this daughter-in-law that won't go away. But that daughter-in-law was actually the hesed of God. God was showing her favor by giving her this loyal daughter-in-law that she didn't care about. She was blind to it because she was blind in her bitterness. In chapter 2, things start to change where Ruth, this daughter-in-law, goes out and she meets Boaz, and Boaz is this close relative who shows favor upon her, right? They're in a difficult situation. And as I intimated when I went over it a couple weeks ago, Boaz was actually the son of Rahab the prostitute. So his mother was a foreigner, and not only was she a foreigner, she was a known prostitute. So he probably had a very difficult upbringing. But God was actually providing Ruth for her because Ruth represented someone who could understand what he went through. And so he immediately showed favor upon her. And so there you see, God knows our true desires. And last week we looked at and saw how Naomi starts to get out of her funk, and she's trying to help out, but she gives some really bad advice, right? Where she says, "Hey Ruth, go ahead and wash and put on some perfume, put on a nice dress, and go to Boaz in the middle of the night." It's bad advice. And terrible things could have happened, but Boaz acts wisely. And he ends that cycle of foolishness. And so we see that when God puts us into situations where we can either take advantage of people or be taken advantage of, it is acts of wisdom, acting wisely and understanding the heart of God where we can end that cycle. And now we're going into this final chapter where we were kind of left on a cliffhanger. In chapter 3, Naomi is saying that man will not rest until this is done. He will redeem you. Right? And so we know Boaz is about to do something. Next slide, please. We know Boaz, as I've been saying all along, Boaz is a man of action. Every single time Boaz shows up in this entire book, he's doing something. Right? Even when he's sleeping actively. That's what I said before. So Boaz is always doing something. Right? You look at him and you're like, man, that man is sleeping. But anyway, he's always doing something. And right away, he starts off this chapter. He finds this close relative, this relative that is next in line. Right? And he sits them down and he starts calling all these other people. Next slide, please. So he calls over these 10 elders. And basically, he's setting up a court. Right? You got the leaders of the town, and then you just have all these random bystanders. And basically, whatever they decide in this group is going to be legally binding. He's setting up a court. Right? Next slide, please. And here's the thing. In the translation, he says, "my friend." to this person, right? It's actually not the word friend, but actually it's one of these weird words. We don't really know what it means. It's kind of like a jibber-jabber word, where the closest thing that it probably is like, hey, Mr. So-and-so, or if we were to say it in today's term, like, hey, you, right? So it's just a general term to acknowledge that person without identifying them. So the author intentionally does not identify this relative. You could look in a family tree and kind of figure out who it might have been, but intentionally, we're not supposed to know who this person is because he's not actually important. Right? Next slide. And so, this is going to be a little bit boring, but let me explain exactly what's going on. Basically, in Israel, the land that they were given, the Holy Land, Israelites felt that it was not theirs to own, it was God's. They were caretakers of the land. So because of that, every single family in Israel had a right to certain pieces of property. Okay? Every family had certain plots of land that was theirs. Now, during times of hardship, they might have to sell that land. And there was a special time called the Year of Jubilee. You guys know how often the Year of Jubilee was? 50, right? 50, some people might say 49, but 49 or 50, most people think 50. Basically, every 7 years in Israel, all debts were canceled. Think about how awesome that would be. Like, I know a lot of you guys have debt right now. Right? Think about every 7 years, they're like, it's okay. Like, that'd be awesome, right? So you already had a system where debt is being canceled. You also have a system where slaves are being set free every 7 years also. But on the 50th year, what people would say the 7th sabbatical year, they would actually give land back to the original owners, right? So like I said before, land was something that was not meant to be owned by humans, but they were caretakers of God's own property. And what that did was, no one could actually have a monopoly of all the land, because every 50 years, it would go back to the original family. And so think about that. You know, most of us live more than 50 years, I hope. So for everyone in that time, they would be able to experience the Year of Jubilee at least once in their lifetime. What that basically meant was everyone could always get a second chance. If you had if you had a difficult season, you know, within that cycle, you would be given a second chance. Your family would have a chance to survive and succeed. Now, I've said all these things. Why have I said all these things? Because this is important to understand because of what a goel, the word I have up there, kinsman redeemer, I think, what was it? What they call it? Something relative redeemer, something like that. The redeemer was a close relative. And what happened was, if you had to sell your land, it was actually the obligation of your close relative to buy that land for you, right? To redeem it for you. This is what a kinsman redeemer was, the goel. They were a close family member that could help you during a difficult time. So basically, Boaz is going up to this man who is the closest relative to Naomi. And he's like, look, this is the situation. And what probably happened is actually Naomi had no right to sell the land, because as a widow, you actually didn't have that type of legal right. What probably happened was before they went to Moab 10 years ago, they probably already sold the land. And so what he's saying is, all right, this land has been sold, but you now have the right to redeem it, to bring it back into the family. And so next slide. So Mr. So-and says, okay, I will do this. I will fulfill my obligation as the kinsman redeemer to buy back this land for our family. Next slide, please. Now, this is again, I'm sorry, there's a lot of technical stuff I need to get into today. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. Here's the weird part in the passage, where he's like, okay, you're going to buy the land? That day you're also going to have to marry this woman. You're like, whoa. Like, what? Well, what does this have to do with anything? And so there was this thing understood to be a levirate marriage. Now again, I'm getting technical, just bear with me. Lever is the Latin word for brother. And this comes from Deuteronomy 25, and this is actually a practice that still happens today, not only in Israel, but in other cultures. So this was a common practice back then. What happens is, if a man passes away and he has a widow, and they have not had a son, right? If there is no heir to this man who has died, then his brother, it's the obligation of his brother to marry his widow, right? And to have a child, so that child would bear the name of his dead brother. That's what a levirate marriage is, right? You're marrying the wife of your deceased brother to make sure that he has an heir, so that his name is never erased. Okay? That's what a levirate marriage is. And the one case where it shows up in the Bible, it's actually not a good example. It's the Judah and Tamar story. You guys know Judah and Tamar? It's a really messed up story. Okay, I'm going to say it really quickly. So Tamar basically married one of Judah's sons, and then his son passed away, and it was Judah's responsibility to marry her to one of his other sons, but he didn't. So he was irresponsible. He didn't arrange a levirate marriage. So Tamar decides to take actions into her hands, and she disguises herself as a prostitute, and she seduces Judah, her father-in-law, and they conceive, and she ends up having twins, Hezron and Perez. It's a really messed up story. But the passage actually talks about it. But that's one example where it was supposed to be a levirate marriage, but it didn't happen. And then she ends up taking things into her own hand, and God still blesses that, because they're actually all from the line of Perez. That said, next slide please. But here's the thing, they're not brothers. A levirate marriage is supposed to be within like your close brothers, and so these are relatives, but like they're probably cousins. They're not brothers. So there's really no sense in how this could have been a levirate marriage. Next slide. But Boaz, what he's saying here, every time Boaz brings something up, basically he's saying, this is what I intend to do, but you have the right to do it first. Okay? So he's like, my intention is to redeem this land, but my further intention is also to marry this woman. Okay? Now, next slide please. Here's one of the weird things, because the text itself is kind of weird. The original text says, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. That's kind of weird, right? And actually, if you go back to the original text, it's in a form where it's only consonants, there's no vowels. It's the consonantal form. If you look at that text, you can actually translate it to, I will also acquire Ruth the Moabite. So if you look at it this way, Boaz is basically saying, you can redeem the land, but I'm going to marry this woman. Now here's the problem. If I have a child with this woman, that child actually owns that land. So what he's telling this relative is, you can do whatever you want with the land, I'm going to marry this woman, but it's probably in your best interest not to buy the land because you're going to have problems later. Right? That's basically what Boaz is doing. Now, I'm sorry, this is complicated. I'm trying to make it as clear as possible. Next slide, please. But basically what Boaz is doing, he is putting himself in a situation where he can not only redeem Ruth and Naomi, he can redeem the property of Elimelech, and he can do it in a way where his relative doesn't look like a jerk. Because what could have happened was this relative could have been, okay, I'm going to redeem the land, but then not done anything about Naomi and Ruth. And everyone would have been like, that's very irresponsible. What kind of relative are you? You're going to buy their land, but you're not going to help them out? And so what Boaz is doing, he's putting this relative in a situation where he can back out and not feel obligated to do anything and allow Boaz to do it instead. Sorry this is complicated, but I just really want to make it clear. Boaz is a man of action, but he's also a very wise man. We saw that last week where he acted wisely in that compromising situation, and we see it again here, where he's doing things in a way that honors that relative as well as the situation that they're in. So, next slide please. Like I said, Boaz was looking beyond just marrying Ruth. He realized that he also had a further responsibility and obligation to help the entire family by restoring the name of Elimelech and his property. So Boaz was doing something even greater than they realized. Next slide. So the crowd responds. The crowd, after the decision is made, Boaz makes his intention clear, they start proclaiming blessings over them. And the first thing they say is, may this woman be like Rachel and Leah. You guys know the story of Rachel and Leah? Another messed up story. Messed up in the sense that Jacob is tricked into marrying the sister instead of the woman that he wanted, right? Now, he's kind of stupid because he should have known this instead of waking up and be like, who are you? But he ends up getting tricked into marrying both. And so he ends up working 14 years for both of them. But here's why they're considered like the matriarchs of Israel. Because how many babies did they produce? You guys know? Total. including their servants. The 12 tribes, right? They had 12 kids. This is a very fertile group of women. And so basically what they are proclaiming is, may this woman be fertile like Rachel and Leah. Now you also have to remember, Ruth was married to Mahlon for 10 years and never had a kid. So this may have been an issue. So they're proclaiming, may she be fertile. And then they say a couple things. May you have standing in Ephrathah, fame in Bethlehem. Again, if you are a Jew and you hear the words Ephrathah and Bethlehem, you're immediately thinking of someone. And you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a good story. And lastly, they proclaim like Perez, and that's related to that messed up story about Judah and Tamar that I talked about before. But regardless, this crowd is proclaiming blessings onto this marriage. Next slide, please. And Ruth has a kid, right? These blessings, these proclamations, they work. And Ruth has a child immediately. Next slide, please. And finally, Ruth gets the attention that she deserves. This whole time, Naomi has treated Ruth like she's nothing, right? And finally, these women proclaim, Ruth is better to you than 7 sons. Right? Sons were basically to have a son in those times as a woman was your ultimate goal. Like that's what you measured yourself with, how many sons you had. Right? And so to say that this woman is better to you than 7 sons, like you can't say anything greater than that. Some of you guys are like, whatever. I don't bear no sons. Actually, these days it's like everybody wants daughters, right? It's like the daughter, like everyone's like, like that's kind of like the season it is now, which is kind of bad because there's more females than men in the world. So if you keep having more women, that's not good for them. But anyway, so better to you than 7 sons. Ruth is finally getting the credit that she deserves. Next slide, please. But then what these women actually proclaim is, this is Ruth's child, right? But they're saying Naomi has a son. Now, as I said back in chapter 1, this book, it's titled Ruth, but it's actually mostly about the redemption of Naomi. Naomi lost her husband. She lost her 2 sons. She didn't have anything to show for it. She comes back to this land that she left for 10 years empty. And now, finally, at the end, these women are saying, Naomi has a son. You have been blessed. This is about the hesed that God is showing to Naomi. Next slide. Now, this was the big reveal. The big reveal that's been hinted from the very beginning. When it kept saying, Ephrathah, Bethlehem, automatically a good Jew would say, David. David is like one of the most important figures in all of Israel, the greatest king Israel ever had. Right? Out of your top 3 Jews, you have Abraham, Moses, and David. Right? And you're seeing this very quaint story of this widow whose daughter-in-law marries this older man. Ends up that they're actually the grandparents. Or they give birth to the grandfather of King David. Right? King David is the greatest king that Israel would ever know. Next slide, please. And so if you remember, when we started off this book, it told us the setting, and it says right from the beginning, in the time of Judges. Now, if you understand what was going on in Israel during the time of Judges, there was no king. They had these military leaders who would pop up every now and then, but basically everyone was doing whatever they wanted. Right? People were falling away from the faith. They were marrying people from other cultures and worshiping other gods. And basically, this period in the history of Israel was one of its most unstable. That's the setting of the story. Next slide, please. But what this book is telling us is things are about to get better. The greatest king that you ever know is about to come. He's only 2 generations away. Things are about to get better. Next slide, please. So basically, what started off as a story is, and now remember, hesed is that key word. If you remember what hesed is usually translated as kindness, It's often seen as loving kindness or unfailing love, and it's shown up in every single chapter, 1, 2, 3, but not 4. 4 is the first chapter where the word hesed doesn't show up. But chapter 4 is probably the greatest example of hesed being shown. This book was not just about the redemption of this widow Naomi. It's not just about the redemption of this widowed daughter or daughter-in-law Ruth. It's not about just the redemption of Boaz, this older man. For whatever reason, he didn't get married. He's a half-Jew. He grew up with a mother who's known to be a prostitute, and the difficulties that he had. It's not just about these 3 individuals. It was actually about the hesed of Israel. This was a period where Israel had fallen away from God, had forgotten largely who God is and what He had done for them. And what He's showing them here is, in these simple acts of faith, I am raising up your greatest king. You have been faithless to me, but I am still committed to you. I will redeem you. That's what this book is about. It's not just about these 3 characters. It's actually about the greater hesed, the greater redemption of all of Israel. Next slide, please. Now, it doesn't end from there. You go to the New Testament. This is an Old Testament book. You go to the New Testament, and immediately you see Matthew chapter 1. You see this genealogy. People hate genealogies, right? You go to the Bible, and you're like, so-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so begat so-and-so, and you're like, blah, blah, blah. You just see all these names. It doesn't mean anything to you. But here in Matthew 1, you see immediately the same line that we just saw this book end with. Perez, all the way to Obed, all the way to David, and then all the way to Jesus Christ. Next slide, please. This isn't just about the hesed of Naomi, Ruth, or Boaz, or Israel. This is about the hesed of the entire world. God's desire, His intention, was the redemption of everybody. Next slide, please. So, brothers and sisters, honestly, the times that we're living in right now, it's probably not that far off from what Judges was like, where it seems like everybody's doing whatever they want. Where spiritually, people are all across the board, people are worshiping other gods, people are falling into different things, they are forgetting who God is. Honestly, brothers and sisters, today is not that different from that right now. But what I want to proclaim to you today is just like the book of Ruth is telling us for Israel, things are going to get better for us. Because as I've said before, the key to the word hesed comes from the relationship that God has with us. The covenant relationship. God committed Himself to us. Whether we are unfaithful or not does not matter. God will always be faithful to us. So even though, honestly, I think we're in a season not too far from the book of Ruth, God will redeem. Next slide, please. And so really, the whole reason why I wanted us to look at the book of Ruth was, we did the book of Esther before this, right? The book of Esther is a very epic story, right? It doesn't have the word God in it, but it's like, everything's like at a higher level. You got like the Persian Empire, the greatest empire the world had ever known at that point. And it's talking about this emperor and all these things. She's like throwing a 6-month party and doing these crazy things. And then all of a sudden, in the midst of this, you have this little orphan girl, right? Who she doesn't have any parents and her uncle's taking care of her. And then she becomes the queen, right? So it's this is a movie, right? Esther is a movie, and you're just like, whoa, little orphan girl becomes queen. And then all of a sudden, the villain comes in, and this guy Haman shows up, and he's like, I don't like Jews. He's like, let's kill all the Jews. And so the king agrees, and so all of a sudden you're in a situation where everybody that you know is about to die. And then this one woman, Ruth, is in a position to save everybody. That's the story of Esther. It's epic, right? Here's the book of Ruth. You got this family that was going through a hard time. They couldn't make ends meet. They sold their land. They were starving. So we're gonna immigrate. We're gonna go to another country. We're gonna make some money over there, and then we're gonna try to come back. Right? Honestly, some of us kind of come from this upbringing. I'm an example of an immigrant family. Right? My parents, they were here in Korea, and they were looking at America, and they're like, you know what, things look better over there. And they went, right? They went in the 70s, and they immigrated to America, and they did that because they wanted myself and my sisters, who hadn't been born yet. Only my eldest sister was born, but they're like, we want our family to have a better situation than what they would have here, right? And so it's a similar story of a simple immigration, but things went wrong. Right? All of a sudden you lose, like, you know, her husband dies, her, like, these you know, like, her sons die, and then all of a sudden she's coming back to Israel with nothing. And if you really think about what the Israelites were thinking, they're probably judging her. They look at her and they're like, you and your family went to a foreign land, to these people that do not believe in God. You got what you deserve. That's probably what they were thinking. They were judging her the whole time. No one was probably even helping her. And this is a very simple story. And then she has this daughter-in-law that won't go away, but then this daughter-in-law is the one that actually brings redemption. And so it's a simple story, and most people just look at the book of Ruth and they're like, oh, it's a love story, how so romantic. You know, like I said, it's kind of romantic, but not really. You know, Boaz is old. Like, seriously, if you were to make a movie about it, it wouldn't be that pretty. Like, you know, you're not going to get some young actor to play Boaz. If you're being, like, true to the Bible. If you're being true to the Bible, it's going to be some, like, almost grandpa-ish. And, like, you know, and then we know that Ruth is kind of husky because she's, like, carrying around 30 pounds like nothing. So yeah, like, it wouldn't be like a Hollywood couple by any means. But it's a simple story. And it's a simple story about people that were acting in faith for simple things. Right? No one would even have noticed what was going on. This is not at the same scale as Esther. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing at the end of this book, these simple acts of faith lead to an even greater end. Where they end up birthing Obed, who is the grandfather of King David. They are actually starting something that will bring a greater redemption to all of Israel. And so, brothers and sisters, the reason why I'm saying this is because in our lives, you know, for some of us, we're not going to be in that story of Esther, where we're going to end up becoming like the queen of the empire, right? Maybe. But, you know, most of us are not going to be like, you know, the vice president or like, you know, the guy under the CEO. A lot of us aren't going to be in these positions of high influence, and that's okay. Because what this story is showing us, when we are faithful to the small things that God puts before us, right? It could be something as simple as someone comes up to you and they're like, hey man, I'm kind of broke, I need some money, can I borrow Ultron? Like, it might be something as simple as that, right? Just giving money to someone who needs it at that moment. It could be something as simple that leads to something even more amazing. So what I wanted to remind you guys, because we're talking this year about how we can be agents of change. Agents of change are those who are faithful on even the small things. Because these simple acts of faith can bring about something much more amazing further down the line. So let's take some time to pray. Go ahead and close for today. Let's take a moment to just pray into our own situation right now. So, you know, whether you're working, you're a student, whether you're raising a family, whatever it might be, I just want you to pray into your situation and ask God, what are areas that I need to be more faithful in? What are convictions that you're giving me, Lord, that I need to be acting upon right now? So I want us to pray into our current life situation and to ask God to reveal to us how we can be more faithful to what His heart and His desire is for us in these areas. Let's pray. toward us, His loving kindness toward us. So I want us to take one moment for us to pray that God would help us to be more attentive, to be more aware of the hesed that's in our lives, that we would be quicker to see the favor of God. And that instead of like chapter 1 where Naomi is so filled with bitterness that's all she can see, I want us to pray that God would allow us to stop focusing on the negative areas in our lives, to stop focusing on the things that are just blinding us, but instead that we would recognize and quickly see the favor of God in our lives on a daily basis. So let's pray that God would start to reveal His hesed toward us that's always been there, but that we would be able to see it all that much more clearly. Let's pray. Give us eyes to see. Give us eyes to see the hesed, your loving kindness, your unfailing love that is in our lives every single day. Lord, help us to see this more clearly, Lord, and to not get hung up and fixed on these negative things, Lord. That we would instead see you in the midst of all these difficulties. Father, I pray for whatever our life situation may be, whether we're studying, whether we're working, whether we're raising a family, or watching our children raise family, whatever it is, Father, I just pray that we would seek to be faithful in what you've put before us. And Lord, that we would take heart in knowing, Lord, that our simple actions of faith, our acts of wisdom, Lord, that lean upon your blessing and guidance, Lord, these can lead to things that are even greater than we could ever imagine. So I pray, Lord, that as you are faithful to us, as your hesed is unto us, may we live our lives just as faithfully. We thank you, Lord. We praise the name of Jesus. Amen.
This time let's give a